The Roman Empire fell 1800 years ago, but China is still standing strong. Why did Rome fall while China survived? We'll answer this question by looking at 3 reasons in this episode of Why. Rome was surrounded by enemies that wanted to destroy it. The Roman Empire had quite a few issues during the 3rd century AD, such as a huge population gap between Rome and its countryside, runaway inflation, food shortages, and civil war. But its biggest problem was its borders. By the 3rd century, Rome controlled most of the Mediterranean, from Britain to Egypt. Defending such long borders required an army so large that Rome ended up spending half of its budget on the military. But even with all those troops, Rome's borders were overrun by migrating Germanic tribes who sacked Rome in 276 AD. After the sack of Rome, the empire broke into civil war. In 284 AD, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into Western Rome and Eastern Rome in an attempt to better defend the borders. However, this only worked for a short time. On top of all these problems, Rome was just getting old. Its infrastructure and institutions had been around for 600 years and were simply not equipped to deal with new challenges. There was also no system to replace the emperor when he died. You see, the Roman emperors weren't elected. They were appointed by the previous emperor before his death. But if the emperor didn't appoint anyone before dying, there would be a power struggle amongst the army generals. This led to lots of instability and civil war, which led to even more instability and civil war. It was this cycle that eventually led to the fall of Rome. During the fall of Rome, there was one thing that kept the barbarians from taking over all of Europe, and that was the Catholic Church. The Church provided education and services to millions of people across Europe. And once Rome fell, the Church became the most powerful institution in Europe. So it seems like the Roman Empire had everything going for it, right? Well, there was one big factor working against Rome, and that was its geography. You see, the first Roman emperor was Augustus in 27 BC. He ruled over an area that looked like this. Fast forward 300 years, and this is what the Roman Empire looked like. How is it possible that Rome lost so much land in just 300 years? The answer lies in the geography of Rome. Rome's original territory was located in central Italy, a place where 2 very important things came together: rivers and flat land. Central Italy has some of the best farmland in Europe, thanks to the Tiber River flowing through it. Also, because the land was so flat, Rome could easily build roads connecting its provinces. These roads allowed trade and communication to flow freely throughout the empire, which made it easier for Rome to collect taxes and maintain control over its vast territories. So Rome started off with a strategic location in the center of the Mediterranean that allowed them to dominate trade and communication. But Rome wasn't the only empire in the Mediterranean. In fact, China was having a pretty good run during this time as well. Let's see how China compares to Rome. During the Han Dynasty, which lasted from 206 BC to 220 AD, this is what China looked like. Notice how much closer the farmland was to the capital city. This is because China's farmland was located along the Yellow River. Most of the Yellow River's water flowed through the North China Plain, which is one of the most fertile areas in China. This meant that the emperors of Han didn't need to build roads or infrastructure to get to their farmland. In fact, the Yellow River provided the Han emperors with plenty of resources without having to worry about controlling long and distant borders. This gave the emperors a lot more freedom when it came to expanding their empire. By the time the Han Dynasty fell, China looked like this. Compare that to Rome again, and you'll see that China grew faster while being much less vulnerable. The reason for this is because of China's terrain. China is surrounded by natural barriers such as mountains and deserts. Mountains are great for defense, since it's difficult for an army to march through them. Also, attacking armies would have to go through high mountain passes, which were easy to guard. Not only does China have mountains, it also has 2 deserts. These deserts acted as barriers that blocked invaders coming from the north and the west. That's why the Xiongnu and the Huns never attacked China directly. Instead, they tried to attack through other countries. While China was able to grow into a large empire without worrying too much about external threats, Rome was constantly getting attacked by the Celtiberians, the Dacians, the Gauls, the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the Persians, and the Parthians. This constant pressure forced Rome to spread its army thin in order to protect its citizens. To make things worse, Rome couldn't even rely on its allies to help out. Most of Rome's allies were in the east, far away from the action. For example, the Armenian kingdom was an ally of Rome, but when Rome needed Armenia's help, they refused because they were busy fighting their own wars. So not only did Rome have to deal with external threats, but they also had to deal with disloyal allies. After the fall of Rome, Europe had to start all over again, while China kept on going. This brings us to our next point, which is the strength of Rome's government. Rome was built by 7 kings, and 7 emperors were assassinated. If we take a look at the year 180, we'll notice that Rome was founded in 753 BC and that the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustus, was deposed in 476 AD. That means that Rome lasted for 1,259 years. If we divide that by the number of emperors Rome had, which was 22, we get 57 years per emperor. And if we subtract the years that the Republic and the Empire were ruled by women, we get an average of 64 years per male emperor. That means that every emperor of Rome had an average lifespan of 64 years. Now compare that to the number of days the last 5 emperors of China lasted. The last 5 emperors of China's Qing dynasty lasted 19, 3, 12, 8, and 2 days. That's a big difference. So why were Roman emperors killed so often? Well, it comes down to 3 factors. First, Rome's emperors were seen as gods by the public. So if the emperor wasn't doing a good job, the people felt that it was their duty to replace him with someone better. Second, Rome's soldiers were loyal to the emperor, not the state. So if the emperor was unpopular, the soldiers would often support whoever was trying to kill him. Finally, there were no clear rules on how to become emperor, so everyone thought that they could become emperor as long as they had enough power. In order to understand how stable China's government was, let's look at how their emperors were put in power. In 1600 BC, the Shang dynasty fell to the Zhou dynasty. At first, the Zhou kings didn't have any power, but over time they slowly gained more and more power until they were in complete control of China. This process took 700 years, and it shows you how patient the Chinese were when it came to taking power. The reason for this patience was a philosophy called the mandate of heaven. According to this mandate, heaven gave the emperor the right to rule over China. If the emperor wasn't doing a good job, heaven would take away his mandate and give it to someone else. But this process couldn't happen overnight. It had to be earned over time. This philosophy promoted stability in the government since no one could seize the throne in a coup d'etat. Also, there was no room for corruption in the government since corrupt officials would lose the trust of the people and, more importantly, the trust of heaven. Rome wasn't the only great civilization to fall. The Mayan, the Greek, the Persian, and the Assyrian empires all fell as well. Yet China endured through all these collapses. What's the secret to China's endurance? According to historian Paul Kennedy, China's secret lies in its geography. China's terrain protected its people from outside invaders, which allowed the Chinese to focus on building their institutions. Throughout history, Rome, Greece, and Persia were always at war with someone, which distracted them from building strong institutions. Rome's endless wars also caused economic decline. Wars are expensive, and the money used to fund Rome's military came from its provinces. Over time, Rome squeezed its provinces for so much money that it became impossible for them to recover. And if Rome could have just farmed its own land, it wouldn't have been in the dire straits it was in during the 3rd century. So to sum it all up, Rome had 3 main problems. First, Rome was surrounded by enemies that wanted to destroy it. This forced Rome to keep a huge army, which took up a big chunk of the tax revenue. Second, Rome's emperors weren't elected, which led to instability and civil war. And third, Rome's farmland was far away from the capital, which forced Rome to spend even more money on infrastructure. Meanwhile, China had none of these problems. Its terrain protected it from invaders. Its emperors followed the mandate of heaven, which kept the government stable, and its farmland was close to the capital. These three factors allowed China to survive the collapse of empires while Rome fell apart. If you want to learn more about ancient Rome, click here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content.